Harry Lipsea here, the 80s at 8. And you guys know this about me. One of my very, very favorite times is when we can bring artists from the 80s to talk about their works. And so excited to have uh, an artist, but so many different titles I can give this man. A Grammy Award winner. He had a number one hit. He wrote a number one country song. Also, an actor, an author, a radio DJ, voiceover, a music archivist. I mean, there's so many different things that this guy's done. I just can't wait to help share his story here on the 80s at 8. So lucky to have Mr. Billy Vera. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and that's just like what I was kind of talking about. What stands out to me is how varied of a career that you've had. So when I do interviews and I'll tell people, they'll say, "Oh, so what has this person done that I would know?" Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what, Billy. I could tell almost anyone in town four or five different things that you've done, and every single person from every segment of life, they will know something. So it could be your song. It could be, hey, have you ever seen King of Queens? Hey, do you remember Burger King when they used to do Waking Up with a King? Yeah, that's the voice on that. What is it like to know that you've done so many different things from so many different mediums that have touched people through the years?
Well, it was a pretty much of a pragmatic decision. I never had gigantic success in any one area, ongoing. So I thought at a certain age, if I do a lot of things fairly well, so let me try them all. And my excuse was that one year the singing would do good. Next year there would maybe I do better at acting. The next year I do better at voiceovers. So at least one of them would be enabling me to make a living in any given year.
Has it been enjoyable to do so many different things?
Oh yeah, because you never get bored.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I would kind of like to at least to start a little bit chronologically and kind of go throughout your journey. Uh it just seems like you were born into music. It sounds like your mother was a singer, and was music always just as long as you remember a big part of your life, Billy?
Absolutely. My mom was a singer, and when I was real little, we lived in Cincinnati for about 5 years after my father got out of the war. Uh, he had been a bomber pilot, and on his way to be shipped overseas, he had gotten some stupid kid threw a rock through the window of the car and blinded him in one eye. So it saved his life probably because a lot of those bomber pilots went down. At any rate, so when he got, out of the hospital, his old job offered him his job back, which was at WLW, which was a huge station in Cincinnati. And he was an announcer. And then my mom, uh, she got a job on the same station singing. So yeah, the music was always there, and my mom would bring records home. I remember specifically one that I just was crazy about, which was the Frim Fram Sauce by the Nat King Cole Trio.
Yeah.
And I became a fan of his forever and still am.
That's awesome. Well, again, we're with Billy Vera here on the 80s at 8. And Billy, looking at kind of your biography, it looks like you jumped right in. How old were you when you kind of started this professionally?
Well, I think, I was about 11 years old when rock and roll changed the world. You had your Chuck Berrys and your Little Richards and your Fats Dominoes and all these people. And I just fell in love with that music. uh, Chuck Berry especially, and well, as somebody I could maybe see myself being like him. And of course, Frankie Lyman was very popular in New York, where I grew up. Frankie Lyman and the T. And I think every singer my age from New York had Frankie as a hero. And so I said, well, maybe I could do this. And when I finally got to high school, I entered the sophomore talent show. And since we were the only ones doing rock and roll, we got 296 out of 298 votes. And so, you know, and the guy that should have won was this guy named Germano Romano. He was a classical player who's even at that age, his hands were insured for like $100,000. And talent wise, we were just dumb rock and rollers. We really deserved to win, except we were showy because we had the show business part down.
Yeah.
you know, but Germano, he is, even though his talent was so great, he only got 2 votes at the most. So anyway, so at one point the following year, there was some seniors in my high school who had a band, and their singer, uh, ironically, his name was Billy V.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And anyway, he joined the Navy. And so they heard about me and they said, would you replace him? I said, yeah, well, I'll try. And so I became the singer in that band and we became, locally popular, playing all these Catholic school dances. And then we made a record. I got in another band that made a record and uh, I was off to the races. We got this one song. I don't want to waste your time, but the story's long, and then we needed a flip side, so I wrote something, and that was the first time I got a song on a record. The company that put it out was Laurie Records. They had the Chiffons and
Hmm.
Dion at the Belmonts, and we were on their subsidiary Rust Records, and so the guy said, "We like that little song you wrote on the B side. You got any more songs?" I said, "Sure." And I played him some, and the guy took 2 of them, gave me $35 a piece for them. What they call an advance against royalties. In other words, when the song earned $35, they started paying you. And the one song I had written with this new girl singer, Dionne Warwick, in mind.
Wow.
She was brand new, and I said, "Boy, can you get me that girl?" Not realizing that Burt Bacharach had her all tied up. Uh, but anyway, so a couple of weeks later, he called me up. He said, "Hey, I got a record on one of your songs." I said, "Really? Wow, that's pretty cool." He said, "Yeah, Ricky Nelson." I said, remember, I'm very young and naive. I said, "Ricky Nelson, he's white. I wanted that girl that, he said, "You ungrateful little putz." He said, "Ricky's going to do your song 5 weeks in a row on the Ozzie and Harriet show. You're going to get paid for that. And Ricky always has hit records." So the first song I ever took to a publisher not only got recorded, but by a big star and became a hit record. I said, "Wow, what an easy business." Ha, ha, ha.
That's hilarious. And that it's
So,
funny because I was actually going to mention to you that growing up, one of my favorite songs was "I'm Walking," and that song was performed by both Ricky Nelson and Fats Domino, and you had music performed by both of them. What was it like to hear those types of artists singing your songs?
well, I was crazy, crazy, crazy about Fats Domino.
Yeah.
So much so, the first record I ever bought in a record store was Blueberry Hill. So I loved me some Fats. When he recorded the song, his career was on a downward slide by that time. But he was ripe for a comeback in a sense. Richard Perry, the famous producer, produced an album with him called Fats Is Back on Warner Brothers. And years later, I got to meet him.
And
And
what was that like to meet somebody like that you would listen to growing up and that kind of thing?
well, by that time, this was like the early 70s, which was there was a big oldies revival in New York at that time. And because my band played that stuff really well, we got the majority of the jobs backing up all these oldies, these heroes from my youth. So Fats was the star on one of these shows at the Academy of Music, a big theater in New York. And so I was introduced to him. He said, "Yeah, this is Billy Vera. And you cut one of his songs." He said, "Oh, yeah, which one?" He said, "Make Me Belong to You." And he started singing it. And it wasn't a hit. It was just like a B-side, album cut. And he knew it. And he said, you know what? He said, I got five children, and that's their favorite song of mine. So I thought he was really just blowing smoke, to make me feel good. Years later, out here in LA, I was befriended by a man named Paul Gayton who grew up with Fats. And I told him that story. And he said, oh no. He said, if Fats said it, he meant it. He said, Fats is not sophisticated enough to BS, you know.
That's awesome. And,
Yeah.
and I also found that interesting that you wrote that song with Chip Taylor, who had written, Angel in the Morning and of course Wild Thing. So what was it like to write with someone like that?
Well, what had happened was Chip actually went to my high school. He was 4 years ahead of me.
Oh, really?
And his older brother was an actor named John Voight. And John went to my high school also. So, but that's not how we met. Obviously, Chip was already graduated when I was in high school. But after Mean Old World by Ricky Nelson, I began taking my songs around to other publishers. See what happens in New York. Remember, you have to remember the record business was a cottage industry at that time. It wasn't the major corporations like today. And so, if you had a little hit record, especially a Ricky Nelson record, anybody would listen to what you had to offer. So this one company I went to, they offered me, they took some of my songs and they also offered me a job as a staff songwriter, which meant they gave me a little office with a little piano and then the boss there said, you're really a good writer. He said, you need a little seasoning. I'm going to put you with this guy, Chip Taylor. He works here. And the first song we wrote together became a hit, Make Me Belong to You by Barbara Lewis. And so, Chip and I developed a relationship uh, writing together. His office was right next to mine. And, we'd come into the office every day and either I'd write something alone or with him, and he would write with other people or by himself. And then later came Angel of the Morning and Wild Thing.
That's cool that you guys went to the same high school and had that history as well. That's really neat.
Yeah. The first thing he said to me when they introduced me to him, he said, I'm jealous of you. I said, why? I'm just a new guy on the block. Why? He said, that's the point. He said, you're a new guy on the block and you got a Ricky Nelson record. He said, and I've been doing this for 4 years and I haven't gotten a Ricky Nelson record yet. But we became friends. We still are friends after all these years.
That's really cool. Again, we're talking with Billy Vera now, kind of going later into the 60s. Talk about your time with Judy Clay, and you guys had a couple hits on the charts, and man, I just love listening to those songs. You wrote
Thank you.
Storybook Children, love that song. What was that time like? And as great as those records were, it had to be a little frustrating knowing that I think that stuff could have been huge hits and it just never probably was promoted or whatever the way it could have been. But I love the music you two made together.
Well, thank you. What happened was when Atlantic Records decided to record "Make Me Belong to You" with Barbara Lewis, we were invited to the session, and we got to meet the great Jerry Wexler, who was the big head honcho up there. And so once we had that entree to him, either Chip or I, one of us said, let's write a duet, take it to Wexler, and maybe we can get a couple of the great Atlantic artists to record it as a duet. So we did it. We made a demo and we brought it to Jerry, and he pounded his fist on the desk. He said, man, that's a smash. He said, get rid of the girl in the demo and I'll record you on Atlantic Records. Well, now this was a dream come true because that was my favorite label. Ray Charles was on the label. I mean, the Coasters, the Drifters, Bobby Darin, just anybody you could name that was great was on Atlantic. And so now we had to find a girl. Well, as I said, we were backing up a lot of hit record acts at the time at this club where we were the house band. One of those groups that came pretty often was Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. And they drive all the way up from Philadelphia. 3-hour drive, and then back the same night because they were only making about $350 a night. Well, we became friends with them because their music was really hard to play, and they told us we were the only band that could play their music properly. So I thought, I said, one of the girls in the group, Nona Hendricks, had a voice I felt would blend with mine. So I called her up and asked her if she wanted to make the record with me because they were on Atlantic at the same time as well. So we made the record with me and Nona. And then their manager got into the act and he said, "Oh, if they have a hit, she'll leave the group. No good." So now we had to audition more girls. We auditioned about 20 girls and they all sounded like they should be singing Stephen Sondheim songs on Broadway. We were looking for something more soulful. And finally, Wexler suggested Judy Clay. He said, "Oh, yeah, you'll like her. She's a cousin of Dionne and Dee Dee Warwick, and
Oh, wow.
Cissy Houston is her aunt." And so she came in, and she was a rather large woman, and she looked like she was about 14 months pregnant, but she sang great, and she had a bit of an attitude also. You know, I think it was a result of all the others in the family had made it big and she hadn't yet.
Okay.
So when she left, they said, "Well, she sings great, but you think you can handle that attitude?" I said, "Oh yeah, I got a sister like that. I can handle it." And I could. Judy understood that I was a good guy and she never gave me any trouble. We were friends until her dying day. So all right, so we put her on the record, and most records become hits outside of New York first, and then they arrive in New York after they've already become successful in the great elsewhere. Well, this was different. This one, New York just took to Storybook Children right away, and within weeks it was like number one on the black stations
Wow.
and number three on the pop stations in New York. So then we get an offer to play the Apollo Theater. Now, you have to remember that in those days, record company didn't sign you to an album deal. They'd put out a single, and if the single sold, then they'd allow you to do an album. So there was no picture of us, so nobody knew what we looked like. And so when we got this offer to play the world famous Apollo Theater, which was another dream come true for me because I was a customer at the Apollo. I mean, I had been there when James Brown made that famous album. I was in the audience.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. It was the greatest show I ever saw in my life. To this day, I've never seen anything as great as that. So anyway, I get up there to rehearse with the house band the night before we started. In those days, you did a 7-day week. You did 5 shows a day. And they worked you pretty good. So the stage manager was a fellow named Honey Coles of the famous tap dance team Coles and Atkins. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh," he says, "Harlem hasn't seen you yet." He said, "But I got an idea." He said, "Judy, you come out from stage right. Billy, you come out from stage left, and you wait for her to make 3 steps onto the stage, and then you make your entrance and watch what happens." So I did what he told me. 1, 2, 3, enter. 1,500 people gasp at the sight of me. This skinny little white boy, you know, with all a whole 15-piece band of black musicians and Judy Clay black, and the whole audience was black. And here I show up, and we went over great. He had put us on. He didn't know how well we were going to do, so he put us on second, which is not a great spot. The opening act is always a highly choreographed act, a lot of flashy dance steps to get the audience excited. And then the second act is usually somebody new or not that good. And then each act gets better, better, better. And then the star comes on last. So after the first show, and he comes up to our dressing room and he said, I'm going to change up the show. I'm going to put you on right before the star. He said, because ain't nobody going to follow you two. And so that became our spot,
Wow.
whenever we played at the Apollo.
That I can't imagine that. I mean, you see videos, you see uh clips of the Apollo. What was it as magical as what you see on clips and videos and that kind of a thing?
It was to me because, like I said, it was the epitome of black show business. It was the pinnacle. And a lot of the acts that I had for, played guitar for, and become friendly with, had said, oh man, the Apollo, man, the first time I ever played there, I vomited all over the place before I went on stage. I was scared because that audience, remember, they had seen the greatest black acts in all of show business. I mean, from Billie Holiday to Count Basie, I mean, everybody that was great had played there. So they expected greatness. And they'd let you know if they didn't think you were any good. They would boo and all that.
Yeah.
They were very, very sophisticated audience. So the fact that they liked us, and we played to standing ovations. I mean, they didn't like us, they loved us. And don't forget, this was 1 month after Martin Luther King was killed,
Okay.
and there was riots going on across the river in Newark, New Jersey. They were burning down the city. So that was another thing that the Apollo management was kind of, afraid of. But nothing. It was just the opposite effect. I mean, they loved us. So it was really good. And then we had a follow-up hit, Country Girl City Man. And at that point, this is inside show business stuff, inside record business stuff. I hope it's not too complex for your audience. But Atlantic Records distributed a company called Stax Records. Sam and Dave and Otis Redding and all that. And that deal ended right around that time. And so Jerry Wexler called me up. In fact, he called me backstage at the Apollo. He said, "You and Judy aren't going to be able to record together anymore because she's signed to Stax and you're signed to Atlantic." He said, "But don't worry, I found you a song." He said, "It's a," and Jerry Wexler was one of the great song men.
Okay.
He could hear a song through the worst demo in the world. And what he heard was on Bobby Goldsborough's album, he heard this song and he called the company up. He said, and they determined that was not going to be the single. So he said, I want that song for my artist, Billy Vera. And so he said, when do you finish the Apollo? I said, I finish on Thursday night. He said, okay, I'm booking our studio 9 a.m. Friday morning. He said, I'll have Arif Mardin write you a full orchestra. Well, you'll have a full orchestra in the studio and you're going to record this song. So I did. And it was a great song, and still is a great song. And so over the weekend, he had test pressings made with typed labels and had them mailed out overnight to every radio station in the country because he believed in this song so much. And it became a hit.
A question for you, Billy. That song did rather well in Canada, almost hit the top 10 of the Canadian charts. Did you do extra shows in Canada or did you receive extra publicity in that country?
Not until many years later. With At This Moment, I did a show up there in Canada
Oh, gotcha.
with the
No,
Beaters.
because that is interesting. It was almost, like I said, almost a top 10 hit in Canada, is in addition to hitting the top 40 of the USAC chart and then 43 on the pop chart. But
Yeah,
yeah, like you said, it's a great song.
it really is. And then of course at that time you had to be there, I suppose. But the entire culture was going through major changes. Uh, the music was going through major changes. Whereas Judy would be up on stage in a gown, I would be up there in a mohair suit. you know, and suddenly, almost overnight, Woodstock and all that, the whole hippie generation. And I couldn't figure out for almost 10 years how to fit in uh, to that because it was alien to me. I had always hung out with older musicians, and so I was, well, simply said, I just couldn't figure out how to fit in. And so I had no success almost throughout the entire 70s. I was doing survival gigs, what I called survival gigs, whether it was with my little band or, playing everything from, mafia clubs to hippie clubs, whatever, whoever would book me, and doing the oldies circuit as a backup musician for a lot of the girl groups, the Shirelles I played for, Ronettes and Chiffons and people like that. And I got by living at my mother's house, like some loser musician.
And so what I find really interesting in reading, knowing your background is that you're you did have a song for Ricky Nelson, but other than that, there wasn't much of a background in country music, and it's kind of the country music was a big part of probably one of the biggest things you did in the 70s. What was it like to have Dolly Parton record a song of yours, and did you ever think you would write a number one country song?
No, and at that time, let me back up a little bit. I was playing in a Ramada Inn, which is a lousy gig. You play for 2 weeks, 5 nights a week, and the only people that are there during the middle of the week is like three businessmen who hate you because the waitresses are paying attention to you instead of them. And on the weekend, you might have a little bit of a crowd. So one night in the middle of the week, this couple comes in, and the waitress says, "That fellow over there would like a word with you." He introduced himself. He stood up. He said, "My name is L. Russell Brown. I wrote Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree."
Yep.
He said, Vera, you're one of the great singers. You're one of the great songwriters. Everybody knows in the business. Everybody in the business knows how great you are. But you never make any money. He said, me, I make a lot of money, and nobody respects me like they respect you. So what do you say to a guy that says that? I'm kind of quiet. He said, I had an idea while I was watching you up there. He said, why don't you and I write together? You could teach me how to write songs that get respect, and I could teach you how to make money. I said, sounds great. So I started going over to his house, several times a week, and we'd write. And he was a very energetic guy. Sometimes we write 2, even 3 songs a day. Not all good, but So anyway, like everybody that does one thing well, Larry wanted to be a record producer. So he gets a job producing Nancy Sinatra. Now, this was after Nancy had her run of a couple of hits. By the way, Nancy had recorded Storybook Children also
Oh wow, didn't know that.
on a very big album, Nancy and Lee, with her producer Lee Hazelwood. And the album actually went gold,
Oh
sold
wow.
more than our version. Yeah. Anyway, so he says, I need a fourth song for the date for Nancy. He said, why don't you start something? I got to go pick up my wife at the beauty parlor, and we'll finish it when I get back. So I'm thinking, what do I write for Nancy Sinatra? My God. Oh, she has this famous father. So I'm writing lines like, I love my daddy, but it really don't matter what my daddy might say. And by the time Larry got back, uh, I had the song finished. So I played it for him, and he fell in love with it. He said, oh my God, Billy, this is a number one song if I ever heard one. So he played it for Nancy, and she didn't like it.
Oh really?
Thank God she didn't like it. So he said, you got to do something with this song, prove me right and prove her wrong. So my friend had this little band up in Connecticut, and he had a girl singer that had a nice voice. Unfortunately, she was kind of lazy and didn't learn the song properly. So when we went in the studio, her voice reflected her laziness. So everywhere we took the record to try to sell it, love the song, hate the girl, love the song, hate the girl. The last guy on my list, love the song, hate the girl, but we're recording Dolly next week.
Wow.
Yeah, let me have the song for her. So I let him have it. And this was right after Here You Come Again. So they were looking for more of a popish kind of a song, which my song was. And you know, so she recorded, or he had promised me it would be the single on the next album. So in the interim, I get an offer to move to California to write songs for Warner Brothers publishing company. And I thought, well, okay, I've had nothing but failure here in New York. Let me give LA a shot. So I packed everything I owned except my record collection in my car, and I hopped on US Route 10 across there. And the day I hit, and every 20 minutes they're playing my song. And I said, wow, I think I got something here. And the day I hit LA, it hit number one. So I viewed that as an omen. And then from there, I ran into my old bass player, and we decided to start a band so we could meet girls. And that was how the Beaters came about.
Wow, very interesting. And did you ever think there was a chance that you would be writing a number one country song?
No, no, and because I wasn't even trying to write a country song at that point. You
Yep.
know, I was just trying to write a pop hit, and that's what they really were trying to do with Dolly, and it ended up being a number one country record.
Wow.
Because
And
Dolly, writes like 99% of everything she records.
yep. Wow.
Not, by the way, the nicest person you ever want to meet in show business.
That's awesome. And when you met her for the first time, did she like the song? Was she all in from the moment she heard it?
Yeah, she loved it. I didn't meet her till after she recorded it. What they did was it was a little long. The song was so they shortened it. They took out like a half a verse or something, and she she apologized to me. I said, no, no, it's better this way, because the song needs to be under 3 minutes to get it radio play. And so she said, I love the verse that we had to take out, but they wanted to make it short enough to play on the radio. So anyway, the way I met her was her assistant called me at my mother's house and said, Dolly would love to meet the man that wrote this beautiful song. So, uh, I figured out, we figured out between us when Dolly was going to be in the East Coast, that I was not working with my band. And it turned out to be one night, and it was all the way down in Maryland. So my daughter, I was divorced by this time, but my daughter was 12. So I thought this might be a nice daddy-daughter trip. So we drove down there, and there's Dolly in this one of these great big, country star buses, and all decked out. And she said, y'all come and hang out with me in my trailer. So we did, and she was just funny, and she included my daughter in all the conversations, and she was just couldn't be nicer. Years later, we ended up having the same manager when I had At This Moment out. So I'd get to see her once in a while.
Yeah, and what just great things she's done through the years,
Oh,
the Imagination Library and just different charities and just a great ambassador for music in general.
you bet. You bet. I mean, there is really, you know, I have you can have your Madonnas and all the rest. I think that Dolly Parton is probably America's greatest star.
For sure.
It's one man's opinion.
Yeah, America loves Dolly. We are back here with Billy Vera, and a lot of people know Billy Vera as Billy Vera and the Beaters. So now you were talking about how the Beaters got going. Talk about your first single. It was your first. You guys got on the top 40 chart. Um, I believe 81 with a song called "I Can Take Care of Myself." Talk a little bit about that song and how it kind of came to fruition.
Okay. Well, once we started the beaters, as I said earlier, we wanted to, we were all single guys, some were divorced, some, nobody had a girlfriend. We wanted to meet girls. And we figured, well, we're 34, 35 years old. We're too old to be rock and roll stars. Let's just do this for fun. And we ended up getting a gig at the world famous Troubadour. A guy, a guy, I was eating at a soul food place that I frequented quite often, and I tripped over Suzanne Plachette's foot. And the owner, who was a great big black lady named Maurice, that was the name of the restaurant, Maurice's Snack and Chat. And we had been there when she opened the place, and so she always had a seat for us. So anyway, I tripped over Suzanne Plachette's foot, and Maurice, was kind of in her cups, she said, "Billy Vera, you tripped on that lady's foot." And I said, so this man comes over to me and says, "Excuse me, did she say Billy Vera?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My name's Matt Kramer. I run Monday nights at the Troubadour." Now, Monday nights at the Troubadour was generally like folk singers or folk rock singers that each would do 20 minutes and then on to the next one. I said, "Well, I got 10 guys in my band. I can't bring 10 guys in to do a 20-minute set, you know, but thank you anyway." He said, and he thought for a minute. He said, "How about if I let you go on at midnight and you can play as long as you want?" So here we are. My then manager said, "Yeah, you should do it." He said, "First of all, you need to play right in Hollywood where the in crowd will see you. And second of all, if you play there at midnight, the worst night of the week, the worst hour, people got to get up and go to work the next day. You'll know within about 6 weeks if you have something that the public wants." So we did it. Well, it only took 2 weeks, and then there was lines around the block, and we became the hottest band in town. And all these guys from record companies would come in, and they're just having a ball. At the time, there was this band called the Knack, and so everybody was trying to sign another Knack. That's how record company guys think. They don't have a lot of originality. This is a hit. We're going to sign 27 acts that sound like them. Well, we were the opposite of the Knack. We were a 10-piece band with four saxophones and pedal steel guitar. And so nobody was signing this. These guys are great, but they're not commercial. So this went on for the whole year of 1980. Finally, those copycat bands all failed, as anybody with any sense would predict. And so they start looking for something different. Well, there's nothing more different than the Beaters. And in 1 week, we got 3 offers from 2 big companies. And then the third offer was from this Japanese company that was opening up a US office. And I decided to go with them because I felt that we would get lost in a big company.
Yep.
And whereas we'd be the first act released by the new company, Alpha Records, and all their money and their promotion would go behind us, and which is exactly what happened. And so I can take care of myself. They first of all, they sent us to Tokyo, where we won the gold prize at the Tokyo Music Festival. And then the record started. When we got home, the I Can Take Care of Myself was all over LA radio. And so we were off to a good start. And then they wanted to put out a follow-up, and we're waiting for the follow-up to be the song they really thought would go places, which was At This Moment. And just as the record came out, the head of promotion got into a fight with the head of the company and quit. So now we got this record out, this follow-up record, and there's nobody to really promote it, And then shortly after that, the company got all messed up, and then the Japanese pulled the plug, and we were without a record deal again.
Wow.
For 5 years.
Wow.
And at that point, Chip's brother, John Voight, had come into the Troubadour one night with his acting coach. And he said, Billy, he said, I haven't seen you sing in several years. He said, but you're doing something I've never seen a singer do. I said, what's that, John? John can get really deep into things. And he said, most singers get out there and say, hello, LA, how the hell are, they manipulate an audience, they sing at an audience. He said, you don't do that. He said, you just lay it out there, man. And I can see your interior work, what actors call interior work. And so what your audience sees is something deeper than just some flashy, act. He said, you should come to David's acting class. David Proval was his coach, who you might remember from The Sopranos and Mean Streets. So I said, John, I'm not an actor. I'm not good looking enough like you. And he said, no, it doesn't matter. I said, look, Jimmy Cagney was no Clark Gable. So he talked me into going. So I started going, and it looked interesting because there was a couple. The first two guys I saw up there were really good, and I said, oh, maybe I can learn how to do this. Maybe it can help my singing. Maybe it can help my music performance. Anything you can use is good. So it took me a while, and then people, maybe a year or so, but people started asking me to do plays. And then somebody asked me to do a television show, playing cop number 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I got a movie, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, which, had a lot of really great people in there, John Lithgow, Jeff Goldblum, Ellen Barkin, really good actors. So I got to work with good people. And so I managed to eke out a living as an actor between that and playing with the band and whatever royalties I was still making from my old song from the 60s, which is not a lot. So that was that. And then one day, now this is 5 years, all this took 5 years, I get the golden phone call. This man said, because I always kept my phone number in the book because I was afraid I might miss something, you know. And he said, is this the same Billy Vera that has the band? I said, yeah. He said, oh, great. He said, I've been looking all over town for you. He said, I produce and write a show called Family Ties. And we were at the club the other night. We heard you do a song that we feel would be perfect for an episode we have coming up. And so he couldn't remember the title. So I knew it was at this moment because nobody ever remembers the title of that. It's a lousy title. I admit it. So, he had us record it, re-record it, in snippets, to use during, they could plug into the episode. And I got mail. Now, I say that because I had a number of songs on television shows before, but never got mail. Usually when they use your song on a TV show, it's in the background. Nobody really pays attention. But this one they did. And who's the singer? What's the name of the song? And so I had an idea. I had been doing some archival work for a company called Rhino Records, and the owner was a friend of mine, Richard Foos. And he and I would have these lunches periodically where we would argue over mundane things like, whose version of Mustang Sally is the best, that kind of stuff. and a friendly argument.
Yep.
So I said to him during one lunch, I told him what I just told you. And he said, and I said, how many records do you need to sell to break even? He said, well, we have a low overhead here and a couple of thousand. I said, what if I guarantee you 2,000 sales? I could sell them in the clubs if everything else fails. He said, sure. And he only did it because he liked me.
Yep.
He'll tell you to this day that he never thought he'd make a penny off of this.
So in his mind, it was kind of a favor.
It was a favor, yeah, yeah, just as for a friend. And because, the guy, Rhino also owned a record store. And the guys in the store had always said, when are you going to come out with an album? It's been so long. Well, nobody wants me. That's why. So now we got an album. By the time we got the album out, we missed the rerun. So the following season, the girl breaks up with Michael J. Fox, and they use the song again when Michael's got his heart broken.
And to me, that was the use of that from that episode was really, it fit the song to a T, I thought.
You're exactly right. Boy meets boy loses girl, boy loses girl. Both the episode and the song were the same. So this time, NBC calls up Rhino and they said, man, we got more calls and, letters than we've ever gotten in the history of the network over this song. And then suddenly I think it started in Hawaii. They started getting orders for the song.
Wow.
And then one led to another, and then North Dakota. I mean, everywhere. Uh, the record just starts leaping over Bon Jovi, leaping over Madonna, leaping over Richard Marx, all these people. Next thing you know, we have the number one record in the country. I'm 42 years old, lost my hair, and I got the number one record in the country. And it changed my life.
Was it everything you imagined when that happened to you? I mean, you'd worked so hard. What did it feel the way that you thought it would feel?
There were so many feelings going through me. Suddenly you have ex-girlfriends are calling you up, cousins you never knew you had. I mean, all this. And I mean, the phones started ringing at 6 o'clock in the morning and didn't stop until 2 o'clock the next morning. Everybody wanted a piece of you. And, managers wanted to manage because the word got out that I was a free agent, as they say in the sports world. And so I had no management, I had no record company, I had no nothing. I wasn't signed to Rhino, it was just a favor thing.
Wow.
And they weren't, and to Rhino's credit and defense, they weren't in the business of hit records. And they really didn't know what to do, but they miraculously came through. They hired a promotion guy. I would go over there every morning and we'd make phone calls to radio stations and I'd do what they call promos. Hi, I'm Billy Vera. When I'm in town, I listen to KRAP, or whatever it is. And I do that like 50 times a day and do interviews with disc jockeys and all that helped. But the record just sold and sold. I got on American Bandstand, which was another dream of when I was 13, got to Dick Clark really liked me. I don't know why, but he did. And he used me on every show that he produced. He did a lot, not only music shows, not only Bandstand, but he also did, he used me as an actor on some show he produced too. And it had me as a presenter on American Music Awards and
wow,
all that kind of stuff. And he actually came to see the band with his wife. And we were backstage, and I said to her, I said, boy, I'm so honored that Dick came to see the band. And she said, you should be. He doesn't go to see anybody. He really, really likes you.
wow.
And then my agent's father managed Doc Severinsen. And so my agent, they were part of the Tonight Show family. So he got me on the Tonight Show, and we did New Year's Eve with Johnny Carson, and Johnny became a fan. He had me on the show 9 times.
Yeah, and I mean, Johnny doesn't have somebody on the show 9 times if he doesn't believe in them or like them.
Not at all. In fact, after I was on the first time, because Johnny didn't like singers because he didn't, you probably remember that not many singers did couch because he thought singers were stupid and couldn't speak well. So Danny, my agent, told Johnny, he said, Johnny, you ought to give Billy a shot on the couch, man. He can talk. you know. So so he did the second time we were on, and then after that, I always got couch. So
Just and to me, Billy, of any, I mean, stories of songs, I think the story of At This Moment is right up there with any other song. It what a journey it became to be from 79 to number one. I mean, what a story.
yeah, buddy, you ain't kidding.
It's incredible. And then you also had after that had a adult contemporary hit back on the charts with Between Like and Love in 88. Talk a little bit about that song.
Well, that one, that and At This Moment were both written before I came to LA back in New York. At This Moment was written. Uh, I had met a girl at one of the clubs. I was when I met her, I was 33, and she was a 20-year-old college girl, beautiful girl, smart. And we were sort of like Bogey and Bacall, that because that was the age difference between Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. And she was kind of like a Lauren Bacall type, had a husky voice and you know so when we first started dating, she told me about breaking up with her previous boyfriend and how he was crushed and oh my God, he was suicidal almost. So I started to write the song. The first, I'd say two-thirds of At This Moment, I wrote from his point of view or what I perceived as his point of view, but I couldn't finish it. I couldn't figure out how to end the song. And then a year later, when she broke up with me, then I knew how the song ended, and that's where that last verse came from. So, that was that. And then right before I moved to LA, I was dating a girl who was very similar to her, uh, you know, really almost a clone. And like Between Like and Love, I wrote about her, and about the relationship with her. If you listen to the words, you can see there's some confusion. He doesn't know, he likes her, but he doesn't know if he loves her, and that kind of thing. So that's how that song came about. And the song was at the peak of At This Moment's success on Rhino. Record companies started calling me up because they knew, as I said, I was a free agent. And you have to be kind of careful with these music business people because a lot of them are sharks. But I knew Joe Smith socially through friends. And usually when you get a phone call like that, it's the secretary. Hello, Billy. Mr. So-and-so would like a word with you. You have time to talk to him? That it's that.
Yep.
This time the phone rang. Hey, Billy, it's Joe Smith. I just took over as president of Capitol Records, and I would love to have you be my first signing. Well, that I was not only was because that was flattering, but because I knew Joe somewhat, and I knew he was good at what he did, and so I signed with Capitol Records, and we were trying to figure out who the producer should be, and that's a difficult choice, but I went back to my old Atlantic Records days, and I thought the great Tom Dowd, who was the engineer almost from day one of Atlantic Records. He produced Aretha Franklin, people like that, Wilson Pickett. And so Capitol got in touch with Tommy, and Tommy came out to LA, and we did the record with him. And they picked Between Like and Love to be the single. And the problem, as a friend of mine, a much more knowledgeable person than myself, explained to me later, he said, your problem was that you were Joe's signing. So the problem with that is that the guy that does the work is the A&R man at the company, and to promote your record and promote your career. And he has nothing to gain if you become a success. That becomes Joe's success. And Consequently, he has nothing to lose if you fail, because that becomes Joe's failure. And it's part of the record business politics that I didn't understand. And but once it was explained to me, I understood it perfectly. It's perfectly logical. So Capitol didn't really work my record as hard as they would have had the guy doing the work been responsible for me. And so Between Like and Love is a very good record, very good song.
Absolutely.
And, and it went top 10 on the adult contemporary charts. But they couldn't spread it to the pop charts, the top 40 charts, unfortunately. But it did get on one of the soaps. Again, the television factor. Not a nighttime show, but a daytime show. I think it was on Days of Our Lives. They used it on there.
And that's a great transition. And I was actually going to talk about that. You have so many, a lot of different TV ties, and one of them was from the '80s was a song used in the theme of "Empty Nest." Talk a little bit about that song, and did that kind of get you, some more fans and people talking about your music as well?
Well, usually people don't notice, who is the singer on a theme show. The good news is about that is because you're in the Screen Actors Guild, which means that you get paid every episode. You go in there one day, you record the song, and then for the run of the show, they have to pay you, and in reruns and in syndication. So that's Empty Nest was on 4 years, so that was a pretty good run. The one that really made a lot of money and still does was King of Queens.
Oh, absolutely. Love that
Nine,
song.
nine, 9 years. Now I didn't write either of those songs. There was a third show that I got a phone call during the time At This Moment was hot. Uh, this producer called me up and said, "Hey, we got a new show. If you want to write the song and sing it, we'd love to have you." And Chip happened to be staying at my house when I was making my Capitol album. I needed songs quickly, and so Chip came out and we wrote some nice things together. I said, "What's the show about?" He said, "Well, Burt Young, is a Marine. He gets out of the Marines. He decides to go back to college, and Corey Haim is his roommate, and it's a comedy, a very stupid comedy as it turned out, but just the same." So Chip and I said, "What kind of song should we write for this thing?" And we were both Ricky Nelson fans, so let's write a Ricky kind of a song. We wrote a song that was sort of based on similar to Traveling Man,
Yep.
and called Answers. And usually they use about 30 seconds of the song. We wrote the whole song, but they use 30 seconds to it. That's all they need. So I didn't want to call him back. We wrote it quickly, like in a half hour. And and so Chip says, "Well, call the guy back." I said, "Well, no, he'll think that's something we had laying around in our trunk. Let's wait about a half hour, and then he'll know that we wrote it now." So I called the guy back. He said, "Can you come over and play it for us?" I said, "Sure." So we get to the office, and because it was a Ricky song, I said, I want to play it for you in the bathroom to get that echo. Like Ricky. So here we are, all the executives, the producers, the director, the secretaries, everybody's in the men's room, and we're playing the song for them, and they loved it. So I said, "Well, I only have one demand." He said, "What's that?" I said, I want to use James Burton, Ricky Nelson's old guitar player, on the session."
Wow.
And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Great, you can have him." And James Burton is a really nice guy and one of the great guitar players in all of rock and roll.
Wow.
So I got to play with James Burton, man.
That is awesome. Well, we're actually going to play the Empty Nest theme, and then we will also play the theme. What was the name of the show again? Sorry,
It's
with Billy.
called Roomies.
Perfect. So we will play both of those themes, and we'll be right back here with Billy Vera. We are back here on the 88 with Billy Vera, and we just heard two great theme songs, one from Empty Nest, and then one from Roomies, and both great songs. And I want to talk quickly about the King of Queens. Is that a song that people associate with you? Do they talk to you about that when they see you?
People, what I started to do about a year and a half ago? I said, everybody knows that song because sometimes they run 6 episodes in a row on cable TV, on Saturday nights, for which we get paid, by the way, me and the band. And so they all know the song. So I said, maybe we should do the song in our act, you know. And a lot of people didn't realize it was us, and some did. They see the credits at the end. They see my name. So, yeah. Now, how that came about was pure luck. I got a call from a buddy of mine. He calls her. He says, "I just took over the head of music at Screen Gems." He said, "We got a show coming on, and we have a theme song already, but we need somebody to sing it. We'd love to have you." I said, "Well, let me hear the song." So he drives over to my house, and we sit in the car and listen to the tape in his car. He said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well," because I asked him what the show was about. He said, "Well, basically, it's the honeymooners sideways.
Yep.
A stupid fat husband that, working class guy, and a hot smart wife who knows more than the husband does. And and instead of Art Carney, you got her father for the comic relief. So it's basically the honeymooners sideways." And so I said, "Well, this guy drives a bus, man." I said, "This song sounds like Paul Simon's idea of a country song." He said, "Yeah, you're right. But we're kind of stuck with the song, because some deal that was made." He said, "You think you can do anything with it?" I said, "Well, yeah, it's got to be dumber. It's got to be really." I said, yeah. He said, "Can you do that?" I said, "Yeah, let me use my band. I wanted to get my guys the job,
Yeah, of course.
And so we went in. We did one take. It was perfect. And then you do another one for safety in case something was wrong. And that was it. Left. The show becomes an enormous hit for 9 years, 9 seasons, and it's, financially, it was like having a big hit record. They're constantly paying you for this. And my guys in my band love me because I got them on the show.
That is awesome. And of any show I've ever seen, it is probably the one show that I think the theme song really it makes sense. It fits. Most songs are songs that fits right into the show, and it just feels right.
Well, thank you, thank you. I I take some credit for that. Changing it around a little bit. So.
Bet. And then one last song, and then I will let you go here in a little bit or soon. But I gotta ask, when did you I was on Spotify listening, and after At This Moment, a song called I Don't Want Her came up. When is that song from? Because I just absolutely fell in love with that song, Billy.
Thank you. That was me and Chip. Chip had not written in a while. Chip had a very bad gambling addiction at some point. He was a genius at picking horses in horse races, and he stopped writing for years. So he came out here, I guess, to go to the track, Santa Anita racetrack, and he called me, and I was getting ready to do a follow-up album to the Billy and the Beaters album that I Can Take Care of Myself came from. And once again, I went back to the Atlantic Records well, and I got the great Jerry Wexler to come and produce it for me. Well, Jerry took me down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Anyway, so I said, well, I'm doing this album soon, and let me come over to the hotel. We'll write a song for that album. Yeah, I'd love to have one with you, one that you and I wrote on the album. So I haven't written in years, Billy. I don't know if I can still write. So we go in there and I kind of forced myself on him, because Chip was one of the great songwriters.
Oh,
I
totally.
mean, one of the great lyricists. My God, I mean, he's just one of the truly great songwriters. And so we wrote this thing and sort of in a Sam Cooke kind of mode. And and I ended up taking the song down to Wexler and he liked it. And we took it down. We did the album down in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Jerry wanted to use those guys rather than, and only some of my guys in my band. Uh, and so that's how that song came. It was never a single. It was just an album cut. But you're not the only one that liked it.
When is that? Is it from the '80s, Billy?
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect.
Like I
So
said, the album we did the album in the latter part of '81.
excellent. Well, I want my listeners to hear that because I love the song. So this is
Great.
I Don't Want Her, and we'll be right back here on the '80s at 8. But like you said that you've heard from other people that enjoy this song as well.
You bet. Yeah.
That's great. So we'll be right back and wrap up our time with Billy, the great Billy Vera, here on the '80s at 8. Well, thank you for sharing that song. That, like I said, I heard that song and right away it kind of evoked some Sam Cooke notes, like you had mentioned. And my dad was such a huge Sam Cooke fan. But that's a really good song. It's too bad it wasn't a single because I love it.
It's funny that you bring that song up, because in the past year, for songs are a funny thing. Nothing happens with them for years, and then suddenly it's like the public discovers them. Well, in this case, not the larger public, but I have had a number of people in the last year or so bring up "I Don't Want Her," which is, I don't know what that is. There's something in the air, you know. But a similar thing happened. If you have time, I'll tell you this story.
Yeah.
Back when I was a staff songwriter in the '60s, your boss would come in, knock on the door, say, the Shirelles are recording next week. See if you can come write something for them. Or Tony Bennett's recording next week. See if you can write a Tony Bennett song. So, and that's part of what being a staff writer is. You learn the skill of of aiming a song at a certain singer. They're the kind of subject matter they like, the kind of vocal range they have. I mean, everybody doesn't have Patti LaBelle's range. Some people have a range of 6 notes. So anyway, this one day he comes in and he says, Chuck Jackson, the great soul singer who, sang Any Day Now and I don't Wake Up Crying, all these great songs. Somebody I was a fan of, he says he's recording. See if you can come up with a song for him. So I'm listening. I'm thinking. I said, well, Chuck's records have been kind of tame lately. He's seems to have lost that get up and go that he used to have. Let me see if I can write something that sort of kicks his butt, forces him to be the old Chuck. So at the time I had been listening to this blues song called Driving Wheel by Little Junior Parker. And in the middle of the song, he stops the music and he starts to preach like one of those black Baptist preachers. And so I wrote a piece of music for that to happen at that spot in the song. And I used that device and made a demo, and Chuck ended up not recording it. So then my publisher took it to another record company, and this young white band from New England recorded the song, and it went to like number 101 or something like that. And that was the end of it, I thought. Well, now we're in this, fast forward to the '70s. And whenever my career goes downhill, my record collecting becomes more of the focus of my life. So I was down in Greenwich Village in Manhattan going through the bins, and this skinny guy with long hair comes up to me. He said, "My name's Lenny Kaye." He said, "I work here in the store, and I know where there's a stash of your old Atlantic albums, 65 cents a piece. You interested?" I said, "Yeah, I could sell them in the clubs." He said, "By the way, I used a song of yours on an album I compiled about a year ago." I said, "Which one?" He said, "Don't Look Back." Well, that was a song I wrote for Chuck.
Oh, wow.
And that group, The Remains, had recorded it. He said, "I used the Remains version." I said, "Really?" I said, "Because I always thought that was a good record." He said, "Well, don't get excited." He said, "The album didn't sell." So now cut to 20 years after that. Uh, I get a phone call at the peak of At This Moment. "Hi, I'm Cyndi Lauper's husband, Dave, and she just recorded a track on your song, Don't Look Back." Well, it never came out. She was going to do it as a duet with Joan Jett. So now, a few months after that, I get a demo CD, promo CD in the mail with 4 songs on to promote Robert Plant's new album, forthcoming album. Don't Look Back's on there. Again, the album comes out. Don't Look Back is not on the album. Now I think the song is jinxed.
Oh, no.
It's and so now cut to another 20 years. Now the song is 40 years old. Rhino puts out an expanded box set of Lenny Kaye's Nuggets album, the one that where he used the Remains version of Don't Look Back. It sold a ton of box sets.
Wow.
So 40 minutes, 40 years into the song, it's now finally making some money. About a year after that, Rhino puts out a Robert Plant box set, and the song's on that, and it sells a ton of records. So now, 40 years after writing the song, it finally has its day. So now, cut to last year, it was the 50th anniversary of Lenny Kaye's Nuggets album. Lenny Kaye, by the way, is the guitar player with Patti Smith.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, has been for ages.
Love Patty. Love them.
Well, there you go. So Lenny decides to do a series of concerts to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Nuggets. He asked me, he said, to sing Don't Look Back at the LA concert. Well, it's this wonderful theater in LA, in Glendale. It's a suburb. And the theater, huge theater, all kinds of acts. You would have loved it. It was all 80s acts, man. The Bangles were there, what's his name? Wayne Kramer from the MC5. I mean,
Wow.
all these great people. In
Wow.
fact, in the house band that backed me up was that guy Peter from the REM.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, every music nerd in LA was there. Every music writer, journalist was there, and so I said, "Lenny," I said, "is there time in the show that I can tell that story about how the Don't Look Back came about?" I said, "Absolutely. The audience will love it," and I did, and they did. The audience loved it, and the next day, Hollywood Reporter, all these the new local newspapers, they're all talking about me, singing that "Don't Look Back," and how I killed the audience. So it
Wow.
was, yeah, it was one of those wonderful little things that was, first of all, it was so much fun to meet these acts because they were all younger acts than me, and I didn't think any of them would know who I was. But apparently they did because everybody wanted to talk to me backstage.
And it
So,
just goes to show you never know the life of a song or just music in general.
that's exactly right. A song will come out of nowhere.
Last thing I want to ask before we're going to talk about a couple books that you have out, but last thing I want to ask is a little bit about you did a lot of voiceover work also in cartoons, commercials. what was that like to do kind of explore that medium?
Well, I was I started doing a radio show because I love old rhythm and blues records, and I just my friend was Tim Hauser of the Manhattan Transfer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we were good friends, and he had a radio show. And he asked me one day, he said, look, he said, sometimes I'm on the road and I can't get back in to do my show. He said, how would you feel about, sitting in for me when I'm out of town and can't do it? I said, sure, I'd love to. Well, that led to the station asking me to do of my own, a show of my own. And I did it for about 6 years and had a ball. I did it for free, for fun. Those college stations, they don't pay you.
Yeah.
So, uh, but I didn't care. I was having fun, and every time I would go in for an acting audition, 100% of the people that I auditioned for would say, "Never miss your show, never miss your radio show." 1 in 5 would say, "I love coming to see the Beaters." So the show had, got me a lot of play. One day I come into the station, and in my mailbox is a note. He has an interesting voice. You believe him when he talks. Would he be interested in doing voiceovers? Well, at the time, I was married to an expensive wife, put it that way. She had a little trouble controlling her spending.
Gotcha.
And I was scared. I was really scared that I couldn't keep up with her spending. So I said, I'll try anything to make money. I mean, so I did a voiceover for, I think it was a car, Nissan. I think it was Nissan. And suddenly my phone starts to ring. I didn't have an agent for that, voiceover agent, but people started calling me, and I said, "Gee, I better get an agent," you know. So I finally got somebody, and boy, it just like hand over fist. I kept getting all kinds of jobs, and I was doing sometimes 2 or even 3 a day, and it was the most money I ever made in my life. To be honest with you, far more than I made in music. And I did it for a good about 25 years.
Wow.
And yeah, I did. At one point, I was doing all the promos for the comedy shows on CBS.
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, watch the nanny, 8/7 Central. Thursday night, whatever.
And
And
you were on UPN as well, right? I think I remember you from that.
I did UP. I did a radio show on UPN, I
Oh,
think.
really?
Didn't I? No, no, no. I don't know. I ended up doing all the networks at one point. CBS was my big one, but I did NBC. They had a lot of creepy shows on Saturday night.
Yep.
They called it the Saturday Night Trilogy. So I would do a different voice for that, a creepy voice.
Wow.
And I did all those, and I did some for ABC and some for Fox
Wow.
as well. Yeah, it was great work, and I had one client. My longest running client was AM PM. They're like convenience stores, at the gas station. That
Oh, okay.
Yeah, AM PM, and I was with them for 22 years.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you also did some cartoons. I mean, I one of my favorite shows growing up was Odd Real Monsters, and you were on like 5 or 6 episodes, I think.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I still get a few little, $20 checks from them.
There you go, Slickest.
Yeah, right. That's right. Wow.
Yes, sir. So, and then I was also the time I remember the Burger King commercials very vividly.
Yeah, those were good. Those were
Yeah, and
good.
just how creepy that king was, and your voice was just perfect. Waking up with the king, and yeah, no, it just brings back great memories.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. So we've talked about all the very many different hats you wear, and recently you've worn the hat of author. Talk a little bit about what it's been like to write books.
Well, that came out of, I became a noted expert on old rhythm and blues and jazz. And I did a couple of hundred CDs of old stuff, compiling, anthologizing. and I would write the notes for those albums and box sets. And then I wrote a lot of articles for this British rhythm and blues magazine. And people would say, "Man, when are you going to write your autobiography, man? You got so many great stories to tell." And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I'm a big enough name." My attorney put me together with a book agent who just felt I wasn't famous enough to sell any books. So finally, a friend said, "Look, just write it. Just write it. Let me and I'll try to sell it." It was a woman friend, a lady friend of mine, and it was a real go-getter, one of those type of people. So I wrote the book, and with all that practice from writing the notes and writing the articles and stuff, I became I believe I'm a fairly good writer, and I just told the story, of my life, and I came up with a title because I first got known, you know, at the Apollo Theater
Yep.
in Harlem. And then I, eventually moved to Hollywood. So I thought that Harlem to Hollywood had a great ring to it. And that ended up being the title of a documentary uh, about my career. And we got some pretty cool people in there. The movie was made on zero budget, but we managed to get, Dolly was kind enough to be in it, Richard Roundtree, my old homeboy, Tim Hauser before he passed away. Dionne Warwick came in and did Nona Hendricks from Patti LaBelle and the Blue, all these people.
Wow.
So, and we found footage of me and Judy Clay at the Apollo.
Oh, really?
I mean, you can look far and wide and you'll never find footage of the Apollo. But this kid, he was the younger brother of a girl I was dating. He brought his little camera with him and he filmed 2 shows of us at the Apollo, no sound. And he shot us from the middle of the theater, and then he also shot us from the wings. So that's some history that you'll never see in any other movie. So Harlem to Hollywood, I think you can see it on Amazon Prime or on Tufi. So there's that, and then the book was well received, got real good reviews, and as I thought, it's not going to sell the same amount of books that Keith Richards' book is going to sell. But then on the strength of that, a publisher came to me and said, "We loved your book. You're really a great writer. We're doing a series of books about independent record companies. We've got about 6 of them lined up, and we'd love you to do one on specialty records because we know that you worked for them." Because I put out about 50 specialty CDs, and I did the Little Richard box set, and I did the specialty record story in a 5 CD box set.
Yep.
And plus, the owner at that time was over 100 years old, but he was still alive, the former owner, Art
Wow.
Root, a great man. I mean, I put him right up there with Jerry Wexler in terms of a great, brilliant record man. And so I had access to all the company files, the session reports, the correspondence between Art Roop and the different artists and different people. And so in terms of accuracy, my specialty book is head and shoulders above most music business books that are out there.
Wow.
Because I read these books, man, and like every 3 or 4 pages, I find a mistake because I'm a stickler for accuracy,
And what's the name of this one, Billy?
It's called Rip It Up, the specialty record story.
Wow.
Rip It Up being, one of Little Richard's biggest hits.
And
So
where can
Harlem
people
to Hollywood and Rip It Up, the specialty record story. I recommend them both.
and where can people find these books, Billy?
Amazon.
Excellent. Excellent. And then I know you're very active on social media, your website. What's your website?
My website is very simple, billyvera.com.
See, that's the good thing about having unique names.
Yeah. Well, Bonnie Raitt, who recorded one of my songs called "Papa Come Quick." She had to buy her name back because somebody was already using her name, BonnieRaitt.com.
Oh, I hate when
So
they do that cyber squatting. Oof.
that's lousy, and I mean, she had to pay a lot of money
Wow.
to some crook. Yeah.
But no, well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Billy. You were such a, I mean, just you following your career has been. I interviewed you for the first time in 2006 when I was a college freshman, and you were so kind to me.
Oh, thanks.
And I've followed, I followed before, and now I follow all the time on social media. And you're still doing concerts. You still have a radio show. I mean, you are keeping busy. How often do you do performances these days?
Usually about once every month or so. I just came back from Italy.
Oh wow.
I performed at the Peretta Soul Music Festival, the 36th annual, and this little town called Peretta up near Bologna in the north, and it seems like the whole town is dedicated to soul music.
Wow.
I mean, you look around on this building, there's a mural of Otis Redding. You know, you look over here, there's a mural of Rufus Thomas. I mean, it's just great, and the people just come every year and they love it. And they gave me a really great band from Memphis, all black guys and three black girls. And for the first time, I got to sing my two Judy Clay hits with a woman for the
Oh
first
really?
time since Judy Clay passed away.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was quite moving. And if you look it up on YouTube, they the Peretta Soul Music Festival, you can if you search through there, you can find my show. I did about six or so songs, seven songs.
That's awesome. Well, I cannot thank you enough. Again, Billy Vera of Billy Vera and the Beaters. And please look him up. He's on social media, billyvera.com. Thank you so much for your time. I had a blast.
Well, thanks, I had a blast too, Harry. Thank you for having me, brother.
Excellent. Well, you have a great day, and we'll probably send you out with one of your songs. Anything else you want our listeners to know, Billy?
Well, you got me you got me finished just in time to watch Young and the Restless, which is what I do this time of day. So
Hey, that's
I'm a
perfect.
I'm a soap opera addict. Not well, actually, I'm a Young and the Restless addict.
And you've had songs on some of those shows, correct?
Yeah, Days of Our Lives and a couple others. Yeah,
Excellent. Well, thanks again. You have a great one, and enjoy the show that you got coming up.
you got it, my brother.